Hi, Gus. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking out the time for this.
No, my pleasure, man. I've been following your content for a while on LinkedIn, so it's nice that we're finally meeting each other in person.
Yeah, yeah. I've been also consuming a lot of your content I guess, for many years now, perhaps even before you were at Indeed. So I've been wanting to chat to you for a while. I think this whole subject that we're going to discuss today, this SEO project management, SEO product management, is a relatively new term within the industry, right? And a pretty fascinating topic to talk about, specifically with you having all of your experience working at Indeed. So, pretty excited.
Yeah, let's just dive into it.
Sounds good. Cool. So let's start with your experience working at Indeed. I know you've been with them, I think, for about 2 years now. I've noticed that you're super passionate about this position and company. So why don't you tell us a little about it, how it is like working with such a large organizations, what kind of teams you work with, what kind of responsibilities you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I dive into my position, I think it's would be unfair for me not to mention there was just a round of layoffs at Indeed recently, and I lost a couple of colleagues. So, it's still my favorite place that I've ever worked, and I'm going to tell you all the reasons why. But I think it's important to give credit to. Uh, it's not always perfect. It's happening especially in the tech industry, and I see it happening with agencies and in-house and so on. Unfortunately, has happened to us as well. All my SEO colleagues were safe, which is very happy to hear. But unfortunately, some other people that I work with are not at Indeed anymore, and I just didn't want to, forget about them or anything like that. Um, but to answer your question, I love working at Indeed. It's quite interesting to work in such a large company because there's so many different things you can play with. Um, when you think you've exhausted everything one direction, you discover a new index that is sitting somewhere that has information that you didn't know we were collecting. And, I have to dig and talk with different people, teams in sometimes the team in US, sometimes the team in Japan, and they start helping me to shape information. So even this week, I found an index where I can look into, okay, these are the number of open jobs that are in this location or for that occupation. So that gives me a whole different angle to say, okay, can I build more content that is around jobs that are actually in demand? And here's proof that they are in demand. Um, I can see day by day new jobs on this or new jobs on that. And I just find it fascinating every time, every couple of weeks, I find a new internal index where I can find more things and just opens up a whole universe of content that I could create. Um, I love the working remotely. Most of my team is in US. All my engineers are in US. I have only two colleagues in Dublin, and I can just almost make my own hours. I have a young daughter, so the nights are not always easy. 2 years old, they get sick all the time, and I have a lot of flexibility to do things. Sometimes it's 9 p.m. and I'm attending a meeting. It's not a regular thing, but I'm there. But if I'm taking my daughter to the doctor at 10 a.m. and it only starts working at 11, nobody's bothered by it. Usually because I try to stay ahead on things that I have to do. So most of the time, I'm pitching what I want to do, and sometimes get approved. Sometimes I'm directed to do something else. But I love that there's so many things that I could do, and I have a lot of flexibility to explore the different things I could be doing, and I get a lot of time to pitch them and spend working months executing something after it's been well thought and discussed with different teams and so on.
Awesome. Sounds good. So, what does the team structure look like? So, you, I believe, work with a lot of engineers, and then I believe you would also be working with content folks. So, what are some of the teams that you're collaborating with regularly? How does your role team hierarchy structure looks like?
Yeah, so we have separate SEO teams for different products, and in my product, I will work with some SEOs. There's some content folks. There's UX, product management, and engineering. And from time to time, you're gonna grab a separate team that does things for several products. Let's say if I want to do an SEO A/B test, there's a team that I can rely on that to come up with the plan for me, and so on. So the more you talk with people, you start discovering that there are new teams that do different things, and you could collaborate with them. And I think for me, what I find that the most fascinating is to get people that think like you, that are very open to collaborate. And I've done a few amazing things with UX that it could just have been a UX feature and nobody would say anything. But I saw there was an opportunity. I can grab this work that was already done, 50% is already done, and I can just apply the SEO part to it. And the same thing happens in different ways. SEO is doing something, and another team will come in and say, "Hey, I can just piggyback on the work you are already doing." So there's another 20% extra effort, but the results are still potentially 100% for both teams.
So you mentioned you have a specific product which you primarily work on within the SEO function. Can you tell us what that product is?
It does vary from time to time. I
Hmm.
like to keep my products as a secret,
Okay.
and I can tell you offline why.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I unfortunately I won't give you an answer in that point.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Cool. So let's move on by defining what product management is within SEO. I think most of the times SEO as a function sits in the marketing team, right? And it helps drive growth impact through organic search traffic, rankings, those kind of things. However, in the case of an SEO product manager, an SEO person is supposed to be a part of the product team, right? Can you shed some light on what this role specifically, how this role differs than a typical SEO role and what their day to day looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I still sit on the marketing team. Was just given the title, and I suppose the workflow to be with the engineers. And I think that's where the main difference is. The main difference is in between an SEO manager and an SEO product manager. I initially thought I was just going to fix technical SEO things. So, oh, there's something broken here, something broken there. You can always find something new in an audit, and I will just be going there and ticking all those boxes. And I think 1 month down the line, or even before that, actually my first week on this role, because I started as an SEO manager and I was offered this other role, someone from UX came to talk to me, and she had this list of ideas and she was pitching this and that, and I was a bit confused because it was just 1 week down this role, and someone just comes in with, "Look, I want to do this, I want to do that." And then I started digging through documentation and I realized we both wanted to do the same things. The SEO person before me wanted to create a feature that was also intertwined with UX. Turns out UX had a better way to do it, and that's what happened. UX did it. But to come back to your actual question, I spend most of my time building new things. So, can I build, let's say, an internal link module that will uh, bring us more traffic? Or can I prove that this feature actually had an impact on the number of people applying for jobs? Because my role in here is not just fix things, but what can we bring forward? So usually when I have to fix something that is broken, or if we do an audit, let's say, oh, there's some page speed that can be improved. After time being on this role and getting the thrill to actually measure specific initiatives that we did. One, I have to do something that is just fixing something that is broken, and I know I can't really prove an impact in traffic or in conversions. Then it just becomes less exciting. It's usually starts getting further down on the backlog, and because I think it's just so fascinating once I started to measure things. So let's
Hmm.
say we built this internal link module. Okay, how much more traffic did we get because of this module? And I never thought this was something that was possible to do in SEO. I actually have not to extend too much on the question, I remember after a few months in this role, I went to show a product director everything that we had done. We released this feature and this feature, and she looks back at me and say, "But how do we know this happened because of the work you did?" And that just crushed me completely. And then talking to her and talking to some other people, that's when I started learning about SEO A/B testing, and there was already a culture of this in the company. So I was like, okay, can I measure all of these things that I've been doing? And once we started isolating as much as you can to measure specific big projects that you're doing, then you can put numbers behind it. And then you can say, we spent 6 months doing this. These are how many extra million people came in here. This is how many hundreds of thousands of people that applied for jobs because of this. I have a control in the test group. And that just changed my how I think about SEO and how I think about my work completely. Because if I can't measure, I'm usually not excited about it. Sometimes you still have to do it, but it's not every time that you. I don't do things just to tick the box anymore.
Right. Uh, Let me just pull this thread a little bit, right? Measurement within SEO product management. Really curious, how does it work? With, like, I imagine at Indeed you would have a lot of resources. You can create maybe a whole measurement infrastructure, but is it more complicated than we think it is, or is it really simple, just running specific tests and saying, hey, this is what we think is the impact? Because again, I'm just thinking from an SEO, a classic SEO problem could be in such scenarios of correlation versus causation. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So what we do, and there are complicated ways to do it that are more accurate, and there's simpler ways that you can just do that directionally. So what we do is you're going to find a control in a test group. So let's say if you made a page title change, you find a group of pages that are similar. So let's say the same template or the same type of page. And before you make that change, you're going to run a causal impact test. And that group will allow you to split this. Here's a group of pages that have essentially we split the two groups on the same metric. So you're going to see a graphic that both pages go up and down more or less the same way over a period of time. So they are equal in terms of the traffic they generate. And once you find those two groups, then one group you make a change and one group you don't make a change. And the group that had the change hopefully will grow more than the other since the intervention happened. And that difference is what I'm going to call as my impact. So I need a group of pages that will have no change at all. So on a website like Indeed, where you have millions of pages, it's easy to say, okay, let's isolate this group. Nobody touches this group of pages. We're not going to change any content. We're not going to add links to it. Not going to make title changes. And this other group, we will make all those changes. And of course, you do that at a small scale first, and you see if there is an impact in there. And if there's an impact, then you say, okay, now I can release this to hundreds of thousands of pages.
Right, right, right. So measurement basically plays a role in this pilot project that you want to do before you roll out big changes across the whole product.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I will sometimes do 1,000 pages, 5,000 pages, 10,000, depends of how big the project is and how long you want something to run. Or sometimes I just do in one country and then I see, is it working well? Okay, let's do two more countries. Still working the same way? Okay, let's do for all of them now.
Right. It just feels so unreal to hear that the fact that 500 pages or 1,000 pages can be a small scale for a company like Indeed.
Yeah, it was very interesting when I joined, because I would say, look, we are growing 10% year on year on this. Like, this is great. And you barely see like 10%, you barely see like the change in traffic visually. So I'm like, I need to do a way bigger splash to be taken seriously, to build respect with people, to make sure I keep my engineering resources and so on. But it's interesting, once you get into that mentality and you get into that flow, and you don't need to get everything right. Sometimes I test things and they just have no impact. But because, let's say, 60% of the times they do have a very good impact, then you build that trust from people that it's okay if sometimes it doesn't work, because it does work in a lot of other times. So, we still need to keep trying to keep getting a few things right.
Hmm. So, one of the narrative that I think I've heard from you, or basically a point of view that I've seen reflected within your content, is you talk about how SEOs, nearly all SEOs, but especially those working in tech companies, should be thinking more like a product manager. What do you mean by that exactly? And how do you see it being a different approach than the methodology most of the SEOs are currently using?
Yeah, I think the big difference for me was understanding how much something costs. So when I'm sitting with the engineers, and once a week we're gonna do triage, and we're gonna give story points to tickets. So I would think before that you just measure things in time. So someone would say, "Oh, it takes 2 hours to do this," but maybe for me it takes 2 hours. For you, it takes half an hour. And so we use a system called story points. So you essentially measure how complex something is, and each engineer um, will have a pace for their story points. So maybe this person can do 10 story points on a sprint. So you're going to assign them 10 story points versus the time that it takes. And over time, I start seeing things like, to release this feature that I know it will have a good impact because we tested the small version, is going to cost me another 3 story points. So if I get all this tree on this sprint, in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be reporting on big results, versus there's this other thing that will cost also 3 story points, but we don't expect to see an impact from it. We can't even measure what the impact is, right? Sometimes, let's say if you want to do something, I just want to like book replace something on a page. It's relevant for users, so they see the correct spelling of something or the correct information, but it doesn't really, you can't really measure that, right? Oh, now this word is written correctly, more people apply for jobs. Not really. It still needs to be done, but once I start weighting different things, I'm like, okay, I might I want to do this first because I can get impact right now, and I can buy in time for the next things we want to do, versus just doing this because because you have to do it, or just to check a box and say we're following Google's recommendations. So I think this thinking about how much something costs, it's very important to me. I see sometimes a different team wants to fix something, and I realize, oh, I can fix this myself for you. I can do this instead of you asking the engineers. And this way we're gonna leave more space for the engineers to finish something that is much bigger. So once you get into this mentality of testing and you learn what works for your website, then you kind of don't want to do all the other little things. Again, some of them are essential. Let's say if we have an accessibility issue, I won't prove any impact, SEO impact from this, but this has to be done. We are doing this for people that have different needs, and you want to make sure that everyone has a fair chance to apply for a job. So it still gets done. Um, but if you see some other minor things that maybe I can solve myself, or maybe uh, it's okay if they don't get done for months, then I'm always looking into what can I do that will have the biggest impact. And that really helps you to separate, I'm just doing a checklist because there are 50 things in this audit, versus this, I know that this will bring us more of what we are looking for.
Right. So what I'm hearing is you're thinking of initiatives, SEO initiatives, in terms of their impact, their cost, and their ease, right? So maybe this ICE framework that is a prioritization model can be applied here. Would you say that this is a way of thinking towards any project, any SEO project, and working with any SEO team, or is it perhaps better for, or more suitable for the tech teams, product teams specifically, working with developers? I mean.
I think that can be useful for any team, any SEO team. It doesn't really need to be just a technical. So let's say if you're, I don't know, doing some work for a blog, and you realize, okay, there are pages that are more bottom of funnel or middle of funnel that they will convert better. Am I on a stage that I need to bring a lot of traffic to bring awareness to the product, or do people already know my product and I just want to bring people down the funnel first? Both things may be good. Maybe with Google, the AI overviews, maybe bottom of funnel won't be as effective anymore. So it might be a moment to change the strategy. So I always keep looking into what is coming next. Sometimes I'm really excited about finishing something, and then I realize, okay, to get this done, we're gonna need a QA, accessibility QA, and that person is on leave for the next weeks. I don't want to get this done now because it won't get me closer to release something or to prove impact. I might as well just wait until that person is back from leave, and then we can do our part so they can check it. So it's funny, like I would say every 1 or 2 sprints, there are things that I'm like, oh, gonna do this in 2 weeks. And then something happens until there that I look at that ticket and it's like, nah, this is not as important as there's something much bigger that is about to happen now. Let's do this other bigger thing first. So I never just have a list of things and we'll just do what is next. There are always a change of priority. There's something else that you discover, or there's a learning from a test. And then you kind of shape and change what you're doing almost every week. The tickets are still there; they will get done. I have very few things that stay on the Siberia of backlogs. If they're staying there for too long and realize we won't do this anymore, we don't need this, we close this ticket, we tell people why, and then we move on. But I think it's about like just adjusting to what is next to you. What can you do now? What is going to bring you closer to get results faster, and then you can actually prove that impact.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I guess this whole impact, cost, ease of doing something overall is a mental model of prioritization is perhaps beneficial for everyone working cross collaboratively with other teams, right? Not just SEOs, maybe, especially in tech companies of any sort, right? Um,
Yeah. Like I'm trying to think. I always try to think back on my agency years and how I would have done a few things differently. And there's one example that I used a few times. I worked with a hotel chain, and if you look for, I remember when I joined the account, we were tracking keywords like hotels in location, and they're all high search volume, and it's all good. Of course, you want to rank for that. But then you do a SERP analysis. You just look at the top 10 results, and for all of those, only big travel agencies would rank. So I could track this keyword as much as I wanted. I could put it on my page title or whatever it was. It was very unlikely that it would ever rank for these. And once you start narrowing down the problem, you realize our best opportunity is on the local pack. Because if you're looking for hotels in location or hotels near something, then hotels will appear. Now, Google monetized that as well. And if you click in a hotel, it's going to give you a list of travel agencies where you can book from, but your hotels are still there as well. So it's a layer less than going to booking,
hmm,
and then you have to fight to rank on that one. And I have no idea how the ranking works on those other properties. But at that point, we did some of that, but I keep thinking that maybe we should have spent more time working with the hotel and say, hey, we need to get more reviews about this or about that. You wanna, we are near this tourist attraction. Let's get people to, or can you ask your guests to leave a review and mention what they saw in the city, or what did they like, why they like the hotel, and so on. Because I tested, and mentioning things on the reviews will help you to rank for the terms related to the search, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And but I didn't go that far. I went on what it was under my control and I could do. But now I'm thinking, no, maybe this would have a higher impact than a lot of the other things we were doing. But it's just a mentality that I started building since I joined Indeed.
Right, right, right. I guess on this note, I've also heard you talk about how becoming an SEO product manager changed your approach towards, you know, like basically avoiding that checkbox approach towards SEO as a whole. It sounds like you think there's a lot of stuff that SEOs do just for the sake of it, and not everything they take an action on, they make an impact focused kind of a decision. Has that been your observation about SEOs in general?
I think so. That's what I did most of my career as well. And I know this testing, it is simple when you have a lot of data. You can't always test this. If you have a new website, you have nothing to test on the A/B test style that we do. So I understand that it is very difficult to build something like this. But if I were to go back to an agency, or if I were to work with the smaller websites in the future, then I would still try to do one thing at a time. Let's just do page titles for this group of pages. Let's just keep tweaking the content for 2 weeks and see if does something happen. Do we make any movement at all? Um, and of course, you can just test everything for everyone. So maybe I would go for this website, we're going to put 20% of the resources we'll be testing. And for this other one, it's going to be another 20%. And once you have a lot of properties, you can go with your team and say, hey, this worked for this guy, this worked for that one. And so it is difficult to do. It's not, we can't go to your client and say, oh, I'm going to keep testing things here all the time. Once you have a lot of traffic and once you have that mentality inside the company, it is much easier to do these, right? Like I didn't have to convince people that this is important. This was already there, and I just took it over and said, this is amazing, I'm going to do lots of it.
Hmm.
But there was already a lot of process established for this. There's a team that does this. And so then it's much easier to sell an idea, to just tag along with something that it was already thought and discussed, and people approve it. So I think I would bring this with me if I go somewhere else one day.
Hmm.
But I acknowledge that it is hard to build that in the first place.
Right. In regards to agencies specifically, do you think this is a model, this approach of everything that you just talked about, having an impact first approach, prioritizing things um, in a logical manner, just thinking as an SEO product manager, is something even agencies can adopt? I imagine there's typically a limited scope that they're working with on clients, and in my understanding is typically when you work with a product company or any company as an in-house strategist, what you get to experience is depth of your experience, right? But on agencies, you're basically just you have a wide variety of projects that you can deal with, but you cannot go deep on any one of those. Do you think this is an approach even agencies can adopt, or do you think this model might break for agencies?
I think it could work to some extent. Not everything is testing all the time, and sometimes you're just measuring the things that it would do anyway. But I think there is opportunity for agencies to take this mentality as well. If I were again to go back to an agency one day, which I love the in-house side, I love the flexibility, so it wouldn't be my first choice. But you never know where life is going to take you. But I would try to be as close as I can be with my clients, get to meet their developers or engineers, and let's say once every 2 weeks, once a month. Try to be part of their team and not just sending messages, sending requests to my contact, and my contact sent to this person, because I've seen this getting lost very often. And getting closer to the engineers, understand how do they want those things to be done, right? I've wrote a bunch of tickets when I started, and would go to triage, and the engineers would say, it's missing. Why do we want to do this? It's missing exactly the steps that you want to complete. And you cramped 4 tickets inside this one. You said, oh, we want to put a new structure data type on this. Sure. I need uh, maybe a UX place, because this is going to appear somewhere in the page. I need a CMS ticket. I need a HTML change ticket. And after these, because there's a visual change, this is going to go through QA. That is a ticket that it took me months to realize that was happening. The engineers wouldn't even mention. It's a separate workflow they have with everything. But I only discovered once I started talking with them and seeing what was happening. And then you become a lot more mindful as well to all the things they have to do, and how complex a few things are. And you start protecting them to some extent, to like, we don't want to do this now. I'm not even going to bring the subject now, because we already have 4 big things running, and this is just going to be, more workload, and none of these things will be completed. If you're running 5 tracks at the same time, you're going to get slower in each one of them. So I might as well just run 1 or 2 and get to the end. And then you start running the third, the fourth, and the fifth. So it is harder in an agency. I keep thinking about how I would approach it, but I would definitely be closer to my clients. I would do fewer things, but I would go with them from start to end, and not just say, "Oh, we put structured data. Oh, we page is loading faster," and just leave to it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. You talked about how working with developers and other teams in general, right, requires a specific skill set of just building that connection with them, understanding what they care about, those kind of things. And I think perhaps this whole role of product managers in general, not just even SEO product managers, have this soft skills component which is super critical to them and their role, right? When it comes to an SEO product manager, again, since they collaborate a lot with other teams, specifically developers, and we have this whole funny joke about how SEOs don't work, very well with developers, and developers never think of SEOs as their best friends. Are there any skills that you would recommend SEOs to develop in terms of their soft skill abilities, ability to communicate stuff, ability to talk to developers and work with them in general, any kind of skills?
Yeah, I think this is the first time in my career that I'm actually very close with my engineers. And before that, it was exactly the typical scenario. You're asking things, they was stall you for a bit. They will do whatever way they want to do things, and it's not the way you thought, and you always start having that conflict. Or you work with a client that hired another agency that you only see once every 3 months, and they say something was done, but you don't get to know when it happened and any of that. So I would say 50% of my job is on the soft skill side, and 50% is on the hard skills.
Wow.
Understanding what people are doing, like what are all the other things they have to do, and how you can communicate with them. It is huge. So I have a couple of engineers that I work with that I know, for this guy, I have to be straightforward. And for this guy, I can come and ask them questions. So I'm going to give a shout out to Amudan, that is an engineer that I work with. And I can come to him at any time of the day and say, hey, I do not understand this thing. Can you tell me? Can you explain me to a non-engineer? How does this work? Because I need to tell all these people about this thing. Here's what I think you're saying. And then I come up with my theory. And sometimes I'm right. Sometimes he corrects my train of thought. And that works well. And sometimes, before I pitch an idea to a bunch of people, I will come to him or to another engineer and say, hey, I have this idea of doing this. Is this possible? Is this complicated? How many story points would you guess, would you estimate this will take? And if they say this is going to be 20 story points, like, oh, okay. So even before I pitch this, I need really to find a very strong argument that's going to have a huge impact, because maybe I can do a different initiative that cost me 5 and it will give me a similar result. So of course I'm going to do the one that only costs 5. Something that I learned since I joined Indeed and helped me to move with a lot of initiatives was to always come up with a proposal. So if you're in a meeting and you say, oh, we probably should be doing this. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah. But if you don't take the front, it's not going to get done. So if I'm really excited about something, I really try to get an answer on the spot, or at least propose something. So if you say, oh, we want to do this new page type for something, and what do you guys think? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Here, I've done already a keyword research. I found 500 pages we can build. How about we send to this team to do this part, we send to this team to do this part, and this other team to do this. Are we all good with this? And sometimes people say, oh, yeah. Well, are you going to talk with everyone? I'm going to talk with everyone. So then I just get the green light. And sometimes they will say, this doesn't work because of A, B, and C. We need to talk with someone else. But then I start getting answers, right? So maybe they want to adjust this to a smaller or bigger group, or they want to make sure that a certain requirement is there. But because you already proposed something, we are not all thinking, what do we want to eat? How about Thai food? Like, oh, then people have to say yes or no. And then you start, oh, no, okay, how about Italian? How about Indian? And so that conversation, it's much easier because you're not, like, if you're excited about something and people say they like it, it's still your initiative, right? Like, you are the one who really wants to drive that. And if you're just suggesting and hoping that someone's going to pick up and say, all right, let's hold hands, let's do this together. It might happen sometimes, but they also have their own projects that they are the ones leading and they're busy with those. So I think something like this worked, coming up with a proposal when I'm pitching something. And even if the proposal will not be accepted, it has been huge for me. Most of the things that I proposed got done. We released almost, it's not a ego bait, but I do feel proud of those that, I'd say 90% of the big ideas that are proposed got done, sometimes earlier, sometimes late, sometimes not in the full form that I had in mind. But because I always come up with this proposal, then you take some of that hard thinking from people. They're like, oh, yeah, maybe. It's like, okay, you already thought about this. Okay, I trust you. Let's go with that.
Right. So I've picked some notes in my mind as you were speaking. So I'll just summarize what you said. You tell me if I've missed anything, just for the viewers, right? So one, you
Yeah.
talked about how um, being conscious of the impact and the associated cost of executing something is important when working with developers normally. So not just think about what this initiative will cost, but also, is there an opportunity cost that we're missing here, right? Could we do something else and drive more impact? The second thing is, if I were to just put it into a broad bucket, it would be prepared, right? Have more data on your side, be prepared to answer questions. Don't just come up with a rough idea, but do your research in advance and then propose something that is more solid, so the leadership can approve, the other teams can be on the same page as you. Would that be an accurate way to summarize this?
Yeah, that is a very good summary.
Awesome, sounds good. Cool. So when I think about a product manager in general, right? Not just a SEO product manager. The word product roadmap comes to my mind, right? And the way I think about this is, perhaps a product manager would put tangible kind of goals in front of them that they want to achieve with the product development overall. if you think of an SEO product manager, right, and you try to put the same kind of a roadmap style, um, you know, journey in front of them, where they have specific goals that they want to achieve, specific initiatives that they want to execute on in order to achieve those goals. What would that look like for an SEO? What kind of goals would they have in a product manager setting in your role? I'm curious, would it be, for example, things related to traffic and rankings anymore, or would it be more product oriented? Hey, is this going to impact signups? Is this going to impact conversions overall?
Yeah. So first, in my product, we actually have it combined, the product and SEO roadmap, because it's the same engineering team that execute them. So we just stack them against each other to know what comes first, what comes second.
Interesting.
And I find it very useful because we are measured the same way. And, you know, before I would always have this fear, like, oh, they're going to drop my initiative. Before Indeed, actually, I'm asking the engineers to do something and like, oh, CMO has to do something first. And then your thing is just left in the corner there for weeks. And so now we have all combined. And I would argue some of the work, I would say the product manager has to be more technical in general than the SEO. In my product is actually an engineer that is the PM. So the person really knows the ins and outs of a few things, right? So some of the questions that I will ask Amudan or another engineer, this guy already has those answers himself because he's closer to that, right? He could potentially go and execute some of those directly. And I think the work is not too different once you get into the right mentality. So let's say if we're both looking into how we can get more people to apply for jobs, how we make it easier for them to find if that job is a match for them or not. That is essentially converting, right? So if there was no product team and you work in a startup, it's also the SEO job to get more trials or to get more MQLs and so on. So that work does go in between both sides. Of course, depending of what you do, you want to make sure that people are saving more jobs or people are filtering better the jobs they want and so on. It won't always translate in traffic, but it will always should translate into a more monetary value on the other end. So I think the job, it's not hugely different, like once you get into this mentality. And I realize like quite often I'm almost stepping up on their shoes as well because I see like, oh, we can do this through SEO. So it's nice to find that combination of both.
Right. Well, I'm curious, again, within the product development sphere, right? So you're at Indeed, and you're thinking of new features that you can possibly integrate within your own product, working with your own teams. Does the SEO element comes first, or is it the product that comes first, and then you throw in the SEO element afterwards? So, in simple words, would there be someone from the top product team who would say, hey, this is what we want to build, and then you jump in along with your team and you say, hey, this is how we want to structure this to make it optimized for search and bring in more traffic? Or would it be, the other way around, where you say, hey, this is what I want to build because I think this will bring more traffic and users for our product?
Yeah, I would say that product usually comes first, because there's no point of bringing 10 million people to a page if they can't do what you want, what you expect them to do, or what they went there for. And SEO, it's not an afterthought. SEO comes together as part of what's happening. But I think if someone would call the final shot, should usually be product.
Okay, makes sense. Cool. So let's touch upon one more thing in the facet of working with developers with product teams in general. So I've heard you talk about this one document, which is called a product requirement document. And for those who don't know, there's a really brilliant talk that Gus has given. I think it is on Britain SEO, right? Brighton SEO. So
Yeah, it's on YouTube now.
yeah, it is not now on YouTube. It's a pretty fascinating topic, and for anyone who works very closely with engineers, I totally recommend you watch the entire thing. I watched the entire thing, and I just had more questions to ask Gus, and of course, we had this planned out, so I'm going to use this opportunity. So the product requirement document (PRD), as you refer to it. Um, You've mentioned how important it is to take initiatives forward when working with engineers. Can you talk about what a PRD is from high level? Can you give our viewers, our listeners, an idea of how it works, why it is used working with engineers, and maybe if you can give us an example of how it is being used with perhaps, let's say, a hypothetical SEO product initiatives, similar to what you did in that talk. That would be amazing. I think you were talking about some terms which normal SEOs might not be able to completely understand unless you add in a hypothetical example. So, can you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, so I love writing PRDs because essentially it's like you could call that a business case. Like this is back in the agency days, I would do a bunch of slides to sell that same idea. But now, even if I went back to the agency side, I would do a PRD. So product requirements document. You're explaining why you want to do something. Here's the background for this feature. This is an overview of the tasks that need to be done and the teams that need to be involved. This is what's going to happen. This is how we're going to measure it, and this is what we expect is going to happen, and then how we're going to measure it. So let's say you are doing an automatic internal link feature. Every time there's a mention to this word, you want to put a link in there. So this way you can diversify your anchor text. You'll save time because you're not doing that manually. So that's what you're going to explain in this document, right? Internal links are important for SEO. Having different anchor text will help you to rank for different things and explain to Google why this page should rank for this term or that term. You're giving a bunch of clues to Google. Doing it manually, it takes a lot of time. So this is why we want to build this feature. It will allow us, if there's a change on now we want to rank for a different term or you have a new page, we can instantly add hundreds of links to this page if there are mentions of those in your pages, of course. So before I pitch something or before I go and tell people, oh, we should do this, I write this document. And then the soft skills come back again. I will go to one person in each team and have a one-on-one and say, hey, I have this idea. Read my document, leave all your questions in there, and let's have a call after that. So sometimes there are things that we just assume that everybody knows because it's pretty obvious in the SEO world. And people will say, why this? Oh, so are we counting how many people are clicking on this link? Not necessarily. Sure, if they click, it's great. They will click, but that's not how I'm going to measure it. So that allows people to get on the same page. If they have concerns or questions or suggestions, we can address them before anything starts to get built. And sometimes the work is bigger or smaller than you think based on that feedback. And once you have the feedback from people on different teams, then you can say, okay, now we're going to start writing these tickets for this. And then you already sold the idea to everyone. They know what's happening. They know why it's important. They know how we're going to measure it, right? Because sometimes in SEO, you're just doing everything and hoping something's going to work. And you don't know if that specific thing worked for sure. It's more anecdotal, right? It's like, oh, since we started building links to this page, traffic really went up. Could it be a core update? Could it be a competitor that messed up with their website? It could be those other things. Usually is what you're doing, or often is what you're doing. Certain things in SEO are quite established. So You don't need to test to prove the impact of links, external or internal. You don't need to prove the impact of changing the content on your page, but you maybe want to quantify like the specific increase that you had and how you're going to do it. That allows you to put everyone on the same page and sell the idea uh, before you start building it. So you're not like hoping that the engineer is going to find uh, a Friday afternoon to give you a hand on this, but it's well discussed. It's part of their roadmap. They know why they're doing right. We sometimes just hope that they will fix this thing real quick, and we forget that without the motivation on what they're doing, it's like your boss saying, "Oh, just write this page." Why? No, just write it. It's like, okay, sure, I'll write for you, but if I know what I'm writing and why I'm writing, I'm gonna do it with more passion. I'm gonna find better ways to do it. I might come up with suggestions to bring this, much further and make it bigger. And I think that's where the PRD comes in. Put everyone on the same page. Make sure you have a solid idea. I've had moments that I wrote the PRD, and then at the end of it, I'm like, I can't really prove this. Like, this is not really doable to do the way I thought. And I just carved the idea. Before I went to every team to get that approval, I was already fell out of love. Um, so it just didn't go forward. I just told my boss, hey, I could not find a strong reasoning to do this. I'm just letting you know. If you're okay with that, I'm not going to pursue this further. Here's a new idea that I want to go after.
So, right. It sounds really interesting, and I have so many things popping up in my head right now. So, one thing perhaps I'll just say for the viewers, you tell me if this is accurate. It sounds like a PRD is different than just writing a brief for a developer, right? Because I believe when people hear about these kind of documents, the instant thought that they have is, oh, I write briefs for content folks. And then in an agency, sometimes we would also write briefs, right? Like very short sentences for our developers on the client side to execute something based on our recommendation. It feels like these are two very different things because for a PRD, it's not just a brief that says, hey, do this, but rather you're using that document to make a case why this is worth your time as a developer, right? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. Like I will come back to the PRD sometimes halfway through the process, and I look at it again, and I think, how did you want to measure this again? Because I don't remember. Like you went to something else. Like you got excited about the new idea, and now the developers are working on these tickets, and you are not there on on the day to day anymore, right? Sure, with this needs to be written in Node.js, and it talks with the S3 bucket on. Like I go back to my guy again and say, can you explain those things to me? Like I'm technical. Depends the angle you look. Like I think I'm I don't know, decent on the technical side, but it gets into some things that I don't really know. Like sure, I can uh I can get a server and put up a WordPress website in 15 minutes. I can do that. What types of server, which CDN to use? I have no idea. Sure, we use a CDN, like, but once you get into deeper on those things, I don't know what they are. And once the engineers start getting deep into building those things, I kind of get out of the scene for a little bit, and I just know, oh, this is happening. We're getting closer to finish this, and then halfway through it, I go back to my document. I read my PRD again. Say, oh yes, this is how we wanted to measure this, and there might be some small adjustments to do on how we are building something or how we are releasing something to make sure we can still do the way measure the way we wanted, or it's going to have the impact we hoped. So it is important not just to sell the idea, but also to for you not to forget what it is. Sometimes it takes 3 months, 6 months, and you don't remember that honestly. So it's good to have this there, um, even when people question you again. Oh, but why we are doing this again? We looked at this together. Here's the document, and we might go through together again. It's like, oh yes, okay, this is still good.
Right, right, right. Well, my favorite part that you just mentioned about the PRD right now is that it can also help you um, bring clarity to your own self. So if you thought about an idea as you mentioned, and then you're just preparing that document, maybe in the process of creating the document, you just get more clarity. Hey, this is not something that I should do, right? Because when you're just putting your thoughts into a document, you're writing it out. It reflects back its pros and cons and in details back to you, and you can make a more thoughtful decision. I love that. So so within the presentation, I know that you actually showed us what a PRD looks like. What are some of the elements that make it super thorough? Because I think it is a super long document. It looks very descriptive. So what are some of the elements that you put there, normally speaking?
Yeah, so I usually have a few headers. Let's see if I can remember them from the top of my head. I'll have background, I'll have technical depth, which for me are just the tasks that we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have the logic behind the initiative. I have how we're going to measure it.
Right.
And when do we expect to release an
Mm.
MVP, and when do we expect to release a full feature. So I usually will have dates. The MVP is going to be out on 10th of June, and we're going to measure the impact in 3 weeks. So by early July, you will look into the results, and then we can decide what are the next steps, if you're going to test again or if you're going to tweak anything. So these are usually the headers that we'll have. Once you start explaining something a bit more, you might get into, let's say if you're doing something for AI overviews, the new SG, you might have a section that you're going to explain what they are. You might add some screenshots and so on. It is mostly text. I would say maybe my documents have something around 4 to 5 pages, and sometimes I go back to them and I make adjustments and so on. But yeah, that's usually the headers you're going to have. Once you get closer to it and you start writing your own, you might find this header needs to be just in this document or this needs to be just in that document, but you only
Right.
know once you're actually doing it.
And would you sometimes just like from a high level float the idea first and then create the document, or would you only go with the document prepared?
I can do a small validation myself. I don't. Yeah, I think it can go both ways. If we're really doing it, I have the PRD because you want to say so much in just a few minutes talking with people, and if they're
Right.
just looking at you, they might get bored. If you're talking for 15 minutes
Yeah.
nonstop, and they're like, yeah, they're gonna no, they look at their other screen, they get a little distracted. But if you're just giving them a document, they're just reading their own time. If they stop looking, they can come back to it, or maybe they can read that while they're having a coffee or eating a snack, and then you at least it helps me. Like I concentrate better, even if I'm just watching something on YouTube. I'm like, okay, if I really need to pay attention, I'm gonna have a coffee at the same time because I need to be doing something with my hands. Otherwise, I look at my phone and look at the other screen and so on. So I usually do have the document when I'm selling, when I'm getting closer to, okay, this is going to happen. And when I have to sell to a lot of teams, I might just validate with my manager or with one team, hey, I found a way to do this. Here's a spreadsheet. Oh, yeah, this looks interesting. Okay, let's bring to a document then, because there are a lot of details that I can't just, if I give you all the 50 details in one go, it's going to come through here, it's going to get out through there, and you're going to forget it.
Right. Cool. Well, that just sounds really interesting. The whole idea of creating this document and working with teams through it, and the level of clarity it brings, not just to the other teams, but also to yourself, is very fascinating. So, the last topic I think we can touch upon, and then we can wrap this up, is for anyone who is interested in moving into SEO product management, right? So normally there are folks who get into SEO, they become an SEO specialist, they do a lot of basic stuff. So if I were to ask you, Gus, what advice do you have for anyone who want to move into SEO product management and possibly work with product teams, ship these kind of features with an SEO lens on them? what kind of skills do they need to develop in order to get this kind of an opportunity. One thing that I'm specifically asking about is the angle that I have in my mind is many people who hear about this term would definitely think about, you know, do I need to be very well versed in technical SEO in order to become an SEO product manager?
So I think for me, the point, I just fell into it. I feel very lucky that I was at Indeed for a month and a half, and the person who was on this role decided to leave. And my manager and his manager were like, "Oh, hey, Gus gives good presentations. Do you want to take this role?" And I learned on the go what I was supposed to do. Like I took the initiatives that this other person was already doing it or had started or had documents on it, and then I spent some time just executing what was on someone's mind already. And I think learning how to measure things using SEO A/B test or causal impact, I think that's a good way to start, because that's where you start building that mentality to, I will do things that I can prove the impact, because I know that the closer you get to the money, the more attention you're gonna get. So that will definitely be the starting point for me. Then second, give it a try writing your PRDs. Like, it can't just be a hypothesis that you have, and how you're gonna try to isolate that to execute it. You're never fully isolating. There's a core update, there's a competitor, there are things happening, normal fluctuations and so on. But you isolate as much as you can, and will at least give you a good direction. So I think that will be, testing is the first point for me, and putting the numbers behind it. Then writing your PRDs, your hypothesis, your business case, whatever you want to call it. And third, if you work in an agency or if you work in-house, try to get closer to the developers that you work with. And by getting closer, I don't mean buy them pizza or pretend to be their friends. It's try to be part of their team and understand what they're doing, what they're busy with, and how you can collaborate together. How can you make something easier for them, right? We want to run a script that will make this change on pages. Okay, I can do a crawl for you and say, these are the pages that might have that change. So instead of going through 100,000 pages, they only have to go through 10,000, and that's not going to overload the system. So you're already making their life easier in a way. So, if you can, but you only learn those things when you're talking with them and you understand what they have to do. And sometimes you can just tag along on things, right? Like I didn't want to do, there were opportunities to improve page speed, to give a classical SEO example, because it's one of the few things that Google gives you a score, right? They say still, oh, it's a low, it's a not an important factor, blah blah blah. And I can't really prove the impact on this. They get a lot of pages that are good, but they bucket them as needs improvement. So moving those pages up or down won't, I can even get a proper test group to say these pages are the ones that improved. They usually move in bulk. So I can't prove the impact of that. I didn't touch that, waited for a while, and then the engineers had to do it for a different reason. They had to work on page speed improvements. On the back of that, I got the credit for it, and I said, "Hey, the team is doing this. It helped us on this way." So my third point on getting closer to them and understanding what they're busy with. It's also like hearing those conversations, right? Like I didn't mention page speed, even though I knew it would be something nice to have. And a short time, maybe 1-2 months later, they had to do it for different reasons. So it was a wise decision to, let's just not touch this. And honestly, they wrote tickets on things that I would not have thought from an SEO point of view. They were way deeper than your, let's load this JavaScript a little later. They were completely different improvements to be made that I wouldn't have had the skills, the knowledge to point them. So understanding the day to day and learning when to bring things forward as well. I think that's a good skill that you only learn when you are on the day to day with people and you understand how maybe things that you think are very easy, they're not really easy to do.
Right. So it sounds like being an SEO product manager is way more than just being good at tech stuff, right? So your hard skills actually maybe are less important, if not the same, compared to your soft skills, right? Simply because of the magnitude of collaboration that involves this role involves in general, right?
I think so, yeah. Like it probably varies depending on the company. But for me, I could argue that is almost 50-50.
Hmm. Right. Very interesting. I think perhaps the industry do not know this. And I've always had this idea that perhaps as you progress forward in your SEO career in general, the importance of soft skills and collaboration skills, communication skills, those kind of things will always rise, and your technical skills can sometimes take a backseat. Um, of course, they're still important. We're not denying their significance, but when you're just working with other people, getting stuff done requires collaboration with them, which typically can only be done if you're good with um, connecting with people, getting work done together.
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes, like, I don't know how to code. I'm trying to learn Python and
Hmm.
I know HTML from my teenager years, but knowing what is possible to do, it will bring you much further away, right? So if I want to connect to different products to bring information from one to another. I don't know how to code this, but I can ask the right people and ask a lot of people and say, hey, where does this sit? Where does this sit? Can those things talk to each other? And once you start saying, finding the answer, like, yes, those things can talk to each other, and this is the way they will talk to each other, then I can bring that to my engineer and say, hey, let's do this.
Mm.
And he or she will do a lot of the hard work, but understanding that it's possible or how
Yeah.
complicated it is, it will allow you to say, okay, it is worth or not worth doing something.
Mm. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Gus. It has been amazing. Totally loved our conversation. And I think there are a lot of, you know, ama- there's a ton of information that perhaps almost any SEO can benefit from, not just the product folks. So, thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell us where folks can find you? How can they consume your content? How they can get in touch?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, guspelogia.com. I write there from time to time. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I'm starting um, a podcast or a YouTube show called SEO Game Show, and the idea is we're gonna invite people to answer 5 questions. We're gonna use Kahoot now, so the quicker they answer, the more points they get. The questions are there are no it depends. It's always based on documentation or something that we can find the source. So there's always a right answer for those. And at the end of every season, whoever gets most points, we're looking for sponsors that will allow the winner to make a donation to a charity of their choice. So we're not making any money out of it. We're gonna get the money that sponsor will give, and will be donated. The chosen charity will be based on whoever wins each season.
Sounds like a brilliant cause and a brilliant initiative. So, yeah, excited for this. Uh, Again, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, I look forward to looking at more of your stuff.
No, thank you for having me. Excited to have this chat, and yeah, let's chat some more offline or out of the still online, but not for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.